Selection is a really important skill to have in Illustrator, and as the saying at the top of this document goes, you have to select it to affect it. You can't do very much with anything at all in Illustrator if you can't select the objects you need to work with. Okay, so let's do some selection here. Selection is achieved with the selection tool. V is the shortcut to get to the selection tool. However, it is the default tool in Illustrator, so it will be selected anyway. And what I'm going to do is click on the heart here, and then the cloud, and then the gear, and the diamond, and so on. Like so, you can see it's very easy to actually select things. If you want to select more than one thing, you can use the Shift key as a toggle. So holding down the Shift key, I have the star here selected. I'm also going to select the heart and the diamond down at the bottom there. And I'm now going to change my mind and decide that I don't actually want the heart in the selection. So with the Shift key still held down, I'm going to click on the heart to remove it. You can see how clicking backwards and forwards there toggles its selection. You can also drag to select things. You don't need to fully encompass them. Just to intersect with them is enough to select them. And sometimes it's easier to select a whole range of things and then deselect the things that you don't actually want in the selection. So there you go, that's how you do select things, but just remember, you have to select it to affect it. The main selection tool is used to pick up objects in an Illustrator document, but what about the things that make the objects? Now, just in case you don't know, vector graphics are made of points and line segments. In the document I'm working with at the moment, I'm going to hold down Command, that would be Control on Windows, and tap Y to go into outline mode. And this shows me a cleaner view of the vector graphics that I have. Now, vectors in reality don't actually have any dimensions at all, so even what you're seeing here is an effect to show them. But let's have a look at how they're actually made. If you tap A on your keyboard, you will get what could be considered as Illustrator's secondary selection tool, the direct selection tool. Now, if you click on the line that makes the heart, you'll suddenly see a series of points, and these are called anchors. And that's what this tool works with. It works with anchor points. Down at the bottom of the heart here, we have a corner point, basically a corner, as you'd expect. All of the other points on this heart are curve points. Okay, and you can see that they have these handles that emanate from the point either side, and they control the direction and power of a curve. For example, if I just temporarily stretch this handle here, you can see that the curve changes, and I'll just undo that, Command Z or Control Z. You do have one other kind of point, and that's called a hybrid point, and you can see one of those down at the bottom of this scroll here. If I click on this, you'll see there's no control handle on the left hand side of this point because it's half a corner, and then there's a control handle on the right hand side because that one is a curve. And so it's all of these things together that allow us to go ahead and work with the individual vectors, so we can draw them and then we can manipulate them as desired. Illustrator's direct selection tool allows us to quickly see the actual anchor points that create our vector objects. I'm going to use Command Y here, which is the toggle between outline and preview mode, just to go back and look at the points that make up the shapes that we have here. Now, in addition to the direct selection tool, which can actually select more than one point by dragging like so, or as with the selection tool, by holding Shift to pick up additional points, there is another tool that we can use to work with anchor points, and that's the lasso tool. Now, Q is the keyboard shortcut to get to the lasso tool, and if you think about it, the letter Q looks a little bit like a lasso. But with this tool, you can drag around a region and select all of the anchor points in that area. So if you wanted to work with a whole bunch of anchor points at once, then you can go ahead and rope them in, almost literally like so, and then manipulate them as desired. You don't need to be in outline mode to work with these points. So if I just go back to the preview mode here, Command Y to do that, Control Y of course on Windows. And just for the purposes of demonstration, we've got all of the points here that make up the heart, apart from the one down at the bottom corner. Just tap S temporarily on your keyboard and that accesses the scale tool, and then click and drag out to the side like so. So just drag to the right and you'll see how you've transformed that entire shape by manipulating the points. So if you need single points, or you can easily select just by clicking and dragging a rectangle, then the direct selection tool is probably your best choice. But if they're in many different places, the chances are that the lasso will be the best thing to work with. But at least you know both of them are there. Illustrator has a couple of automatic selection tools or semi-automatic selection tools that it's worth knowing about. The first is the magic wand tool, which you get to by tapping Y on the keyboard, or of course choosing it from here in the toolbox. Now it does have a little bit in common with the magic wand from Photoshop in that it is based on tolerances. So what I'm going to go and do is click on any one of the blue shapes here, and you'll notice that some other blue shapes become selected. Actually, I think in this particular case, it's all of them. Try the same with the yellow shapes. Yep, and it's doing all of those, and the orange shapes and the magenta shapes as well. Yep, pretty much the whole thing. So how do I know that it's doing that? Well, if you go to the tool in the toolbox and double click it, you'll see that it has a particular preference for the fill color. Okay, that's the thing that's selected just there, and it has a tolerance of 32. Now, just like in Photoshop, it goes all the way up to 255. Now look what happens when I click on one of the blue shapes. Everything becomes selected. Now you may well be wondering why that's happening. Well, underneath here, everything has a grayscale value, and that's where that particular thing comes from. And most of the time, you don't need to concern yourself with that at all. All you need to concern yourself with is tuning the actual tolerance, okay, to get to where you need. And the default here is 32, okay, which works pretty much most of the time. If you wanted to add in other properties, you could, for example, add in stroke color. So if the stroke color is the same, if I now go and click on one of the blue shapes with a white stroke, for example, you can see it's filtered down to just the two shapes that have that property. If I turn that off and go for stroke weight, then if I click on one of the blue shapes, you'll see it selects 4 of those particular things, actually 5 and 6, because the tolerance there is within 5 points. If I change that down to just maybe 1 point or so, okay, then that might change. So I'll go ahead and click on something else. There you go. That's narrowed that right down. So again, this time the tolerance here is slightly different because color is the thing that uses the grayscale value. So you see you have plenty of options to select using that tool. Sometimes, however, you've already selected something with one of the other selection tools and you want to go ahead and select those. That's where this small button, which you'll find in the interface, selects similar, not to be confused with the global edit tool there, which will select similar things, again, based on various different properties. You can see here it's using all properties, but you can narrow it down like so. And in the select menu, there are some commands there that you may find useful as well. So same and then all of those different options, and even by different kinds of objects. Okay, and selecting the inverse, which is sometimes a good idea as well. If you've got one thing that's easy to select but you want all of the things around it, then inverse works really easy. And a deselect command as well, although most of the time, if you've got room, just clicking away from any object in an area that won't select anything will work as well. Sometimes achieving selections can be a little bit problematic, and there's nothing worse than getting a selection that's been difficult to achieve, doing whatever it is you need to do to that selection, only to find out that you need to select it again shortly afterwards. Now, Photoshop has save selections in which it saves an alpha channel, but that's based on pixels. Illustrator, on the other hand, can also save selections, but it's based on object IDs. Because as everything is created in Illustrator, it's given an ID. It goes on under the hood so you don't see it, but it does have one so the program can keep track of things. Let's use the wand tool here to select maybe some of the orange dots that have a common colour. Now, we're pretending for now that this has been fairly easy to do because it has, right? But sometimes it's much more difficult. We can go to the Select menu and choose Save Selection. Let's just call this one OR dots, for example, so for orange dots, like so. And now, even if we move all of those things around, so if I go ahead and align them all to the center, for example, and go back to the Select menu and choose OR dots from there, you can see it still selects those objects. So it doesn't matter what you do with them, where you move them around to inside of your artboard, Illustrator will still be able to find them because it latches on to those IDs. If it takes you more than a few moments to select something, and you think even for a moment that you might end up going back to it, it costs you absolutely nothing other than a few seconds to go back and choose to save a selection.